Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 93 of Sports Speak. Hope you're doing well. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Lots to get to today. The Masters going on. Tiger Woods made the cut in his first match back from his car accident, February 2021. Talking MLB opening day, NASCAR as well. We'll have our picks at the end in reaction to the Ty Gibbs-Sam Mayer scuffle from last night at Martinsville. First off, before we get to that, though, some kind of very tragic news today. Dwayne Haskins, a former standout at Ohio State, first round pick by Washington, then the Redskins in 2019. Now is with the Pittsburgh Steelers, played a little bit last year, was expected to be in the competition for potentially the starting quarterback job with Mitch Trubisky. Unfortunately passed away from a car accident this morning after training yesterday with the team. So thoughts and prayers, of course, with the Steelers organization and the Haskins family. So had to start with that, but let's switch gears to Tiger Woods, Tim, because we got to talk about this. I mean, he's not doing great, but he made the cut. And you know what? After more than a year not being on the golf course, I mean, just impressive that he's been able to do this. And, you know, you can tell that he's battling through the pain. He's had to adjust his swing, even has trouble kind of bending down and trying to pick up the ball out of the hole after it's in. But he's kind of reshaped himself and he's still able to do this. And maybe the TV coverage has been a little too much on Tiger Woods, but I mean, what do you expect at this point? But hey, he's done a great job and kudos to him for making the cut.
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about miracles. I mean, let's be honest, when Tiger Woods had that accident, everyone thought not just his career was over, but let's be honest, likely his life was going to be over with how tragic that was. And thankfully, obviously, it wasn't. And, you know, the whole situation with him speeding and so on, you know, he had a big impact because, you know, Tiger Woods is rather, you know, people like Tiger or not, you know, over the years. And it's been really a 50-50 flop throughout his entire career. But you have to respect just how much he means to golf history. I mean, he's in general in sports history, he's one of the most influential, you know, African-American individuals or minority individuals within, you know, within America that has changed the world, along with Michael Jordan, you know, along with people like Kobe Bryant, where it's so good to see him back on the golf course. And, you know, through the first day, at least I could say, you know, he, 1 under, that's pretty dang good for someone that hasn't played in a year, you know. So it's not easy to just get back in the golf course and easily, you know, hit under par and find a groove. But yeah, Tiger made the cut. I know it's not the best performance in the world from him, but in my opinion, compared to other times when he's come back from surgery and he's missed some times, he's playing a lot better than where he was the first time around. So it's good to see. I expect Tiger to, you know, only get better as time goes on. I'm not saying that he's going to have, you know, a spectacular performance to end this Masters, but, you know, for him, it's about getting back into the rhythm. And I can't emphasize enough. I know a lot of heavy coverage is on him, but it is a big story. It's Tiger Woods, man. You know, so I understand covering him a lot. You know, I expect really throughout the final day, there's going to be a lot of, you know, watching him as well as the main battle, you know, going on for the win throughout the day. So again, I'm real excited to see Tiger Woods back, you know, on the golf course. And it's going to be a good Masters. Every year it's always been, but this one is shaped up to be a pretty good one.
Well, the other big thing happening this weekend, opening day, kind of a 2-day event because about half the games were on Thursday, half the games on Friday. The schedule was kind of screwed up because of the lockout, and they're playing the games they would have been playing the second week of the season, which is why you had some teams off. Regardless, everybody has opened their seasons now. And of course, we got to talk about the New York Yankees, who did get the win. And I feel like I've got to debate you a little bit because I saw you in the group chat saying that the season is still over for the Yankees, even though they won in walk-off fashion in 11 innings over their big-time rivals. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that because I don't see, depending on how your expectations were going into the season, I don't see anything from that game that was necessarily worse than what you could have reasonably expected from the Yankees to begin the season. Because I'm sorry, I've doubted Garrett Cole for a long time, and I still will. Garrett Cole is a great pitcher. He's not one of the premier pitchers in the game. I just got to say that. And we saw that early yesterday. We saw it in the wild card game the last time he was on the mound. I was driving to Rutgers, and I thought it was hilarious hearing John Sterling very depressed at the start of the game, with Garrett Cole giving up the home run and the double, giving up 4 hits before they even got an out. Garrett Cole's a great pitcher. I don't think he is really at that elite status right now. Yankees have a lot of rotation questions, but their offense can clearly hit for power. So my thing is this: you got the win in opening day against a rival. I don't think there was really anything that really jumped out that was necessarily worse than what you could have really reasonably expected from this team going into the season.
Well, when I had said that, that was also practically in the first inning. And I will say this, not to be a contradictory Yankee fan, but I can't undermine the fact that, again, it's one game out of 162. This team's going to have a lot of ups and downs. And don't get me wrong, the Yankees obviously made some moves. They got Isaiah Connor for life and so on. You made some trades, which shows that there's not exactly an aspect of complacency, but there's still the problem, in my opinion, of the fact that when you look at this roster, and like you can look at it compared to, the Dodgers or other teams, I just don't feel this team is still, in my opinion, strong enough to win an AL East. And it's, yeah, the Yankees won in walk-off fashion. That's great in extra innings, but let's also not act like the extra inning rules aren't a problem. I still believe that, for example, teams pushed for, other rules, no, doubleheader or 7 inning doubleheaders anymore, and also turned around and pushed, to not have the extra inning rule and for it to come into play into 2 games of opening day yesterday at the 1 p.m. hour, is to me a little bit tough, because don't get me wrong, while every team each has an even chance, I just still don't find, for example, Josh Donaldson hitting a single while there should be fairly a runner on first base, a legitimate enough reason in the bottom of the 11th inning or whichever inning it was, but the overall for the Yankees to walk off and win, because again, I still hindered, and maybe I sound, very classical, but I just feel that the runner on second for both teams aren't earned, and it's only to continue in run scoring.
I agree with that. I don't agree with the rule with the runner on second at all, but I mean, you can't necessarily discredit it, because like you said, every team has an even chance. Red Sox could have just as easily capitalized in that situation with a runner on second and nobody out in the top of the 11th inning. So I hate that rule. I don't understand why it's back, because at first they said that rule was going to be gone. All of a sudden, 2 weeks before the season, by the way, we're bringing back the ghost runner. I don't agree with it, but every team does get an equal chance.
Well, right, but I'm also going to say it like this, and it goes back to everything I talk about, at least on the offensive end. Now, don't get me wrong, the bullpen looked great, but let's be honest, for the Yankees, and let's not forget, they went to last season opening day. They went to extra innings and they lost, and a lot of people hated the rule. So, but outside of the fact of the rule, it's more of this: is that for me, yeah, the bullpen looks great. Again, I can't emphasize 1 game out of 162, and it's more of we're going to see ups and downs. Yeah, some guys look great, but again, I can do this today for Boston. Boston could turn around and they could have a dominant offensive day. Anything after Garrett Cole is unpredictable. And let's be honest, Garrett Cole in the first 2 innings of a game is always unpredictable. So, and again, he had a really tough first inning yesterday, but this is practically what he did all of last season. You could say the same thing as well about Luis Severino. You could tell in the first 4 pitches the kind of outing he's going to have, depending on the location. So it's going to be tough. The Yankees, I still feel, need another starting pitcher. Don't get me wrong, Nestor Cortez was great last season, but is Nestor Cortez going to be that guy that's going to carry you to a World Series? I just don't quite see that happening. Same thing with Jordan Montgomery. The rotation isn't bad. Jameson Taillon's not a bad pitcher, but for example, I'll compare it to the Mets. I still feel, even without Jacob deGrom, the Mets have a better starting rotation. And I think that's a fair analysis when you look at the Yankees. And again, I can't emphasize enough this too. Last season for the Yankees, the problem wasn't the hitting. You had a healthy year from Stanton. And by the way, too, don't even get me started about the fact that the Yankees tried to lowball Aaron Judge and couldn't extend him and won't have the opportunity to extend him. There's a very good chance that, yes, he will be coming back, but he will explore free agency to get more money. I don't see how someone that you could consider a top 5 player in baseball, especially one of the better defensive outfielders in baseball, and not pay him $300 million, in my opinion, is absolutely irate. I understand Judge's perspective of wanting money, but when it's all said and done, the fact of the matter is, this season, the offense yesterday was produced by home runs, and that's how the Yankees offense practically always is. We can't ignore that fact either. And they still at times yesterday showed in clutch moments that there was still a little bit difficulty hitting, at least with runners in scoring position and, moving runners over. And that's going to be continuing to be a story. But the big thing for me is, yeah, the bullpen looked great in game one, but I still can't circle, or how do I put it like this? I can't still heavily emphasize that, yeah, the bullpen's great for one game, but the rest of the season, the Yankees did nothing to help their bullpen, which was the big problem last season, as well as the starting rotation. It only regressed. So I just still feel that they already labored innings on their bullpen. And what happens when we get to the deadline, not to get this rant further, but what happens when they get to the deadline, when they have to go another man down on the main roster, and then they're going to be short one more pitcher? It just doesn't make sense to me in that regard. And yeah, the Yankees sat out Gleyber Torres. They opted, which also mind blowing to me is, how do you consider a situation of playing DJ LeMahieu or Gleyber Torres? Why would you not want to pay the person that you paid, I don't know, nearly $200 million to extend his contract to play for the New York Yankees? Why would you consider benching him over someone that struggled the last 2 seasons? That doesn't make sense to me either. And that's going to be a story that develops not just throughout the rest of this series, but likely throughout the first half of the season.
Yeah, and you know what? We can kind of mention that the Yankees just released their lineup for today. The person who was in the lineup yesterday that's sitting is Aaron Hicks. So what they did, they've got Judge in center field. Donaldson is DHing today. You've got LeMahieu at third, Gleyber Torres at second. So
no Stanton in the lineup?
Stanton's in right. Outfield is Gallo, Judge, Stanton.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand why. See, that's tough. I'm assuming DJ's playing third then, right?
Yeah, DJ's at third, Gleyber's at second.
Third, okay. See, I find that to be not a bad option. I just don't like the option of, now as the season goes on, yes, DJ LeMahieu deserves days off. I 100% agree with that. But it's more of on opening day when you're talking about the discussion of, you're arguably, and I still, in my opinion, one of the Yankees' best players sitting out to someone that hasn't produced over the last 2 seasons. I just don't find that to be a realistic story. And it's the fact of the matter of, Gleyber Torres is still playing for a contract, just like how Aaron Judge is playing for a contract. And it's a little bit frustrating to see in that regards, but I'm sure that stuff will all pan itself out. And you see like that opportunity today, and it'll continue to be that way throughout the season. The Yankees, that's the one thing I'll say about the offense that's been positive, especially with trading for Connor Falefa, is that there's a lot more opportunity to now mix things up. I mean, obviously, you look at Marwin Gonzalez, who can literally play anywhere in the infield, so that's a big perk, as well as him being a utility outfielder. Aaron Hicks struggled yesterday. Let's be honest, it's unfortunate, and I was expecting a little bit more out of Kyle Higashioka, only for the reason of he had such a good spring training, led everyone in spring of home runs. And again, I know it's one game, but it felt like his plate approach, as well as Joey Gallo's yesterday, lacked a bit at times. And I mean, you're going to get that throughout the season. There's going to be a lot more opportunities to come, but it's a good call by the Yankees, I'd say, today, at least, trying to get everyone as much as you can involved. But if that's still, it just still digs at me. If that's a developing story throughout the season, that's a little bit of problematic thing, because I just don't see how you can bench DJ LeMahieu, who is, again, you emphasized extending him for practically the rest of his career. That's like turning around and benching Alex Rodriguez, for Chase Headley at third base, when it's all said and done, just because, Chase Headley seemed to be more promising after struggling 2 seasons. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, Yankees are going to have to do a lot of different things and mixing up. The one thing that they do have on their side is they have a lot of players in that lineup that can play several different positions. So you've got LeMahieu, you can switch him around to different places. Joey Gallo, of course, has a couple different places. Kiner Falefa. There's ways they can mix and match this offense. And I mean, in the end, if you're really competing to see who you can get in that 9, I mean, it's not really necessarily it's a good problem to have, because if you have many capable people you can stick into your lineup, it's better than kind of trying to fish and try to find someone who can play a specific position. The fact that the Yankees have different options kind of puts them in a good place, especially if injuries arise. And you being a Yankee fan, me being a Mets fan, we all know about injuries. And how about we transition to that and talk about the Mets? The Mets are 2-0 now. I'm very happy with how these first two games have gone as a Mets fan. Biggest thing has been that this team all of a sudden hits with runners in scoring position. And even with 1 out, 2 outs, they're producing late in innings where you've got guys at second and third. Starling Marte and Robinson Cano have come up clutch in both games so far this season with 2 out RBI hits with runners in scoring position. The Mets were the worst team in the majors with runners in scoring position last year, even worse than Baltimore and Pittsburgh, and it wasn't even close. So that is promising. Jeff McNeil as well, through the first 2 games, 2 home runs. He's 4 of 8 from the plate. He's got 3 extra base hits. Really impressive, because McNeil, an all-star in 2019, was 3rd in the National League in batting average in 2019, had a pretty solid shortened season in 2020, but just fell off a cliff last year. Nice to see him kind of producing. But of course, the big question, the offense is one thing, it's the pitching. But through the first 2 games, Tyler McGill, a lot of people thought he wasn't going to be in the rotation. I thought that was kind of crazy from the beginning, even when everybody was healthy. Because when you saw how McGill pitched last year, and the real struggles he had were in September when he was worn out because he had thrown more innings than he had in any year in his minor league career before that. Before that, he was pitching great. And it was kind of reminiscent of when Jacob deGrom came up to fill in for injuries in 2014 and wasn't a heralded prospect like Matt Harvey or Noah Syndergaard, and of course panned out to be the best pitcher by far out of any of them. McGill, another one. Mets had talked so much about David Peterson and Justin Dunn, who got traded to the Mariners in the Cano deal, as their big new pitching prospects. And McGill just came up to fill a spot because the Mets reached a point right around the All-Star break last year where they only had 2 healthy starters in Marcus Stroman and Taijuan Walker, and they needed to find some alternatives. And he pitched great, and he gets the start on opening day, pitches well, keeps the Nats off the board, strikes out Juan Soto twice, which is not an easy thing to do because Juan Soto strikes out the least of any hitter in the National League, and he got him to go down on strikes a pair of times, both times with runners on base. I think he deserves a spot in the rotation even when everybody is healthy. I still am iffy about both Carlos Carrasco and Taijuan Walker, especially Carrasco with just how bad he was last season. But McGill, great. Scherzer, you know what? He stretched out to 6 innings. He's clearly healthy. One of the few starters, by the way, who in their season debut went more than 5 innings. I mean, Garrett Cole only went 4 for the Yankees. Darvish got pulled after 6 no-hit innings. Scherzer gave up 3 runs, but still threw 6 innings, still threw 83 pitches, and clearly the hamstring is fine. And the Mets are sitting 2-0. Of course, don't want to get too excited right now, but you know what? 2 wins are 2 wins. It's a hot start from the Mets, and now we get to see some of these back half of the rotation questions answered this weekend. Chris Bassett makes his Mets debut today. And then I think Carlos Carrasco is scheduled to go on Sunday. So that's going to be an interesting one. I don't have much faith in Sunday's game. He is going up against Anibal Sanchez, who has had a history of getting absolutely torched by Mets hitting over the past few years with both the Marlins and the Nationals. So we'll see what happens there. But for the Mets starting 2-0, pretty solid. Now, I do want to kind of transition to some rapid fire because we've got a lot of topics in sports to cover. Good problem to have once again, because we're in the month of April. So much is going on. NBA playoffs coming up, NASCAR, NCAA, March Madness, Final Four last week. We'll get to that. But I want to get your take because we didn't do an official Major League Baseball preview. We did somewhat of one with Zoe, but we did post our predictions for awards and who we've got winning the World Series on Twitter. You can check that out at SportsSpeak Live. And Tim always has one big surprise usually. And AL Cy Young, he's going with Zach Greinke to win it for the Kansas City Royals. So now that we're on the air, Tim, you got the floor. Tell us why you're going with Greinke for this award.
You know what? The last 2 seasons, especially in the pandemic season, Zach Greinke was, let's be honest, underwhelming. And don't get me wrong, he's in the back half of his career, this being very likely the final year of his career. And, you know, I look at it like this. He's back home in Kansas City, you know, he going all the way back to 2009 when he won a Cy Young for the Royals. I look at it like this. 5 of the last 7 seasons, there's been an unpredictable winner in the AL. We haven't been able to say that about the NL. NL has been practical. You look at Jacob deGrom, Max Scherzer, all these guys in the mix. They're premier marquee pitchers, and that says a lot about the National League and just how good of pitchers they've produced over the last 2-3 years. Where you can kind of circle your head around of who's going to be good, who's going to be not. But I look at 5 of the last 7 years. I mean, I go all the way back to maybe the only, I would say, sure Cy Young Award winner. When I look at it, guys like Justin Verlander, Corey Kluber, who at that time had won, his second Cy Young, to me is not unexpected. It's not out of the realm of normal. But when you look at guys, for example, Blake Snell, who had won a Cy Young and was below 500 the season before, it's the fact of the matter is that it's never consistent in the American League for some sort of reason. And hey, that could be because the AL teams are a lot more better offensive. Now, of course, we're going to see a much more balance, not the National League as a DH. But the point is that I think that you're going to see, that story continue in the AL side of unpredictability. And if there's anyone, in my opinion, again, I could circle my head around and say, hey, I could see him winning against Cy Young, it would be Zach Greinke. It's very hard to say that I can turn around and say a pitcher that had a real good season last year to turn around and say, hey, you're going to win Cy Young this year. It's a very hard thing to see. But, again, Garrett Cole, I don't know why. And I don't get this again. I don't want to go back to Yankees point, but I just don't get why Garrett Cole every year is a favorite in American League to win Cy Young. I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. He hasn't won an AL Cy Young for a reason on the year. He dominated for the Astros. It's very tough for me to say, wow, Garrett Cole deserves to be a Cy Young. And it's like, I look at it too. And, it's funny. I'm mentioning, players unpredictable. Rick Porcello won a Cy Young. Anyone remember that? So it's like, I just don't see why Zach Greinke couldn't win a Cy Young of guys that have struggled the last 2 seasons and at least end his career with a bang. And who knows, maybe he helps the Royals make the playoffs. And what I might add too, and a big reason for me making this decision as well, Eddie, I still can't ignore it's a very struggling AL Central. The AL Central outside of the White Sox is underwhelming. I mean, you can't convince me that the Guardians team or Indians, whatever you want to call them, from the past is any good from where they were 3-4 years ago. Yeah, you have Shane Bieber, don't get me wrong, but that offense to me, outside of Jose Ramirez, who they just extended, doesn't look too promising. The Detroit Tigers, I still feel, are not ready to play good baseball. And, yeah, you could say Kansas City isn't exactly ready for that either. But when it's all said and done, I mean, that's just 3 teams you could circle and say, hey, they have a 50-50 shot against, winning. And that, of course, those aren't the only teams that, in my opinion, will be towards the bottom of the American League, and they're going to play a lot of struggling teams this year, throughout the AL West and AL and AL East, and I think it's going to play to their favor a lot this year in Kansas City.
Yeah, and with just the way the schedule is, and especially with the expanded playoffs this year, that it's expanded now to 6 teams, I still only see 1 team making it from the AL Central. I think the East, of course, has 4 teams that can legitimately make the playoffs, and the AL West, we know Houston's going to be good, Seattle could be good. Texas, still some questions about their pitching, but they did bring in John Gray and have some guys up and coming in the farm system. And the Angels, maybe this is finally the year they can put it together with a healthy Mike Trout and a healthy Shohei Ohtani. But with the Central, the Royals are actually a sneaky team. I'm not saying Zach Greinke is going to win the Cy Young, but I think they are a team that could contend for the AL Central title, because look at the rest of the teams. Tim already outlined Cleveland, outside of Jose Ramirez and Shane Bieber, don't have much to offer. And they also spent the second least money in free agency of any team. So this is a team that is looking towards a rebuild and not really willing to spend right now because they laid out so much money 4 or 5 years ago when they were a premier contender. This is a Cleveland team at this point that is not really focused on the present and is more about the future. And the only reason they locked up Jose Ramirez long-term was because fans started freaking out that they hadn't done so and they hadn't spent any money. So, the Guardians felt like, okay, we've got to do this. But I don't think they're going to be that great. And Shane Bieber, love him as a pitcher. He's also very injury prone at times. So we'll see how far they can go. As for Detroit, They're an up-and-coming building team. They had a great year last year, exceeded expectations. Spencer Torkelson is now on the team. Javier Baez, by the way, had the walk-off hit to win the game in the season opener against the White Sox. I think they're going to be good, but I don't know if they're going to be great necessarily. I think they're still about a year or two away. Minnesota, I still have a lot of doubt for. Yeah, they made some decent moves with both their rotation and, of course, their offense. They brought in Gio Urshela and Gary Sanchez, along with bringing in Carlos Correa, who may just be a short-term rental because he's got an opt-out after this year and after next year as part of his 3-year deal. I don't see him staying in Minnesota for very long. But the Twins had a great lineup last year, and they could barely win 70 games. They had an absolutely disappointing season, arguably the team that most underperformed in the entire major leagues after the great runs they had, winning 100 games in 2019, being a top seed in 2020, and still not being able to get through the playoffs. So I doubt the Twins excessively right now. And as for the White Sox, yeah, they might look like the strongest team, but Lucas Giolito left his first start with abdominal tightness. They don't have Lance Lynn for the first month or two of the season, and they blew a game, and their bullpen hasn't been great. So they're going to have to really rely on their offense. I think the AL Central is wide open. Almost unanimously, we all saw Bobby Witt Jr. winning AL Rookie of the Year, and, he had a game-winning hit on opening day. So he's definitely going to be an impact player. Salvador Perez, we'll see if he can follow up what he did last year. Probably not going to be able to approach 50 home runs again, but, if he can be a serviceable catcher and play really well offensively and all-star caliber, Royals have a decent mix. So we'll see how it goes. We're just a couple of days into the Major League Baseball season. Of course, we'll have more coverage of that all throughout this season here on Sports Speak, but I want to jump into some rapid fire now and kind of swing around NCAA, NBA, and we'll finish with some NASCAR. And let's start with March Madness. Before we get to the championship game, of course, North Carolina upsetting Duke. Ironically, Coach K's first ever loss was against Duke. His last home game was a loss against North Carolina, lost to North Carolina in his first game, lost to North Carolina in his last game at Cameron Indoor Stadium. In his last game coaching, loses to UNC as an 8 seed. Armando Bacot, so huge. So was Caleb Love. Of course, North Carolina didn't win the championship, but for Duke, we saw how UNC with Hubert Davis as the coach in his first year replacing Roy Williams was so good and got UNC to the championship. Do you think John Shire, who's been on that staff, handpicked by Coach K, can keep Duke as competitive as we've seen the success with UNC in the first year after Roy Williams?
I mean, it's as simple as this. Duke is always, well, obviously last year, not as much, but, coming off a pandemic year, but Duke is always going to be a contender, in my opinion. Again, it's one of the more iconic basketball schools that you circle and say, hey, this team doesn't just have good history. They're always competitive. They're always competing for a national championship. And, it's funny. I remember being there, for your birthday back at Buffalo Wild Wings about a month and a half ago, where both you, me, and Dylan could say, wow, what happens if Duke loses to UNC here? Everyone will absolutely lose it. And it happened. And all I can think in my head, again, when that game happened, it's, unfortunate for Coach K, an unfortunate way to go out. I know he wants to go out as a champion, but the fact is the story wrote itself again. And, I find it very, like you mentioned, ironic. His first loss came against UNC. Now his final loss will come against UNC. And it's a tough fitting way, of course, to end out what has been a spectacular coaching career. But I mean, UNC just played a lot of momentum, and they struggled a bit earlier in the season, and that really killed their ranking, especially against some ranked teams. And they turned around and they played really good basketball when it matters. And that's the beauty of March Madness. And I'll say it for Duke, Duke, I still feel, even with the coaching change, maybe going through the process of bringing in players can be a little bit more difficult because you have a coach that doesn't have, the structure or, the notoriety of Coach K in regards to all the accomplishments. But when it's all said and done, I mean, I still can't ignore this team has a lot of promise. And, hey, there's going to be some big players they're going to have, going into second and third seasons that can only develop and grow better. And I think Duke's going to be in really good hands. UNC, again, is always a handful every year. Really, anyone in the ACC is a handful every year. But when it's all said and done, again, I think Duke's going to be okay.
Let's talk about Kansas. They were the only 1 seed that did not get tripped up, made it all the way, kind of cruised through. We're down early against UNC, came back in the second half. And I think we got to talk more about the legacy of Bill Self. Now, the 16th coach with multiple national championships. And I feel like when everybody talks about Coach K, Roy Williams, Calipari, Boeheim, all of the elite coaches of our era, Rick Pitino as well, Bill Self kind of gets forgotten about. And I think now he's got to silence those people. 13 Big 12 championships since 2001, been a 1 seed 8 times in the NCAA tournament, a few trips to the Final Four, and now 2 national titles, and getting Kansas back to glory on a year where we saw a lot of upsets, and he was able to outlast the other Blue Bloods and win the championship. So I think at this point, Bill Self is building quite the legacy, and I don't think he's going to be kind of doubted much longer.
No, I agree. I think they're building a great legacy in Kansas. And the fact of the matter is, it feels like every year, honestly, through the last few March Madnesses where it's like, hey, Kansas, high seeding, it feels like there's some potential, but then they're always one of the first teams it feels like to fall apart ultimately of the higher seeds. And for the record, this season, I felt like that UCLA, for example, was going to go back against the Final Four. Of course, obviously that didn't happen, but I felt like Kansas was, of the teams that were 1 seeds, in my opinion, were not as stronger, for example, as the team of Gonzaga, and these other 1 seeds. I felt like they weren't the weakest, but they were one of the weaker teams. And, the fact of the matter is, though, they were able to, again, build up a run, go to a national championship is huge. And I can't emphasize enough too, Kansas went through a little bit of a tough stretch where they played great basketball. And I'm not talking about this season, but, past seasons where they played great basketball where it just wasn't enough. And I can't emphasize enough this, when you look at other big basketball schools, Kansas, of course, is always going to be one of them, the Jayhawks. But for me, I feel like from a recruiting standpoint, other teams have done a better job of bringing in, big young college athletes, to be the face of their programs. And I'm not saying that Kansas didn't do a good job of it because obviously they won a national title this year, but in past seasons, it's been a little bit more of a struggle for them to bring in those big players. I think a win, not just a national championship, doesn't just get everyone's attention, but it circles the direction of, hey, could they repeat next year? And on top of it, who do they bring in? Could they find, a little bit more help, maybe get a couple transfers in, you never know. And I think it could help Kansas, aim towards another national championship next year. They're definitely going to be a team to watch for a little bit because they played real good, I would say, throughout the entirety of March Madness. And the fact that they beat UNC in what was a nail biter and in my opinion, one of the greatest national championship games you'll ever see in history of the NCAA.
And just such a great tournament. I mean, it started, unfortunately, for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, but that game was a thriller against Notre Dame. Some upsets in the first round, the big run for St. Peter's, probably the best game of the tournament in the Final Four between Duke and UNC. And then, like you said, the championship then lived up to the hype. UNC and Kansas, North Carolina blowing the lead, having a chance to tie it at the buzzer, and Kansas gets the win. The one thing I will say, though, for the Jayhawks, a lot of older players. The average age of their roster was actually older than the Memphis Grizzlies this season. So they're losing a lot of talent. So fortunately for them, there are 2,000 Division I men's basketball players currently in the transfer portal. 2,000. So there's a lot of people that they could recruit. And of course, playing for Bill Self and a team that just won a national title is definitely going to be a very attractive selling point for many of these student athletes. But let's shift to the senior circuit. National Basketball Association final weekend of the regular season. Still some seeding questions, but all the playoff spots have been clinched. Before we talk about the Eastern Conference, of course, we got to mention it. The one team that is not going to be playing in the postseason and is at risk of 50 losses, they're 31-49, 2 games to go, the Los Angeles Lakers, and just a disappointing season to say the least for this team. The Lakers didn't work out with Russell Westbrook. I mean, LeBron had a good year, but injured at the end, didn't play in those last couple games with the ankle injury. Anthony Davis, hurt for the second consecutive year. And all in all, at this point now for the Lakers, 2 trips into the playoffs in 4 years, the 1 championship aside from that, an early exit. And now for the second time with LeBron James and the team missing the postseason.
Well, let me ask this question to you. Eddie, do we think this is the last LeBron in LA? That's for me, it's a little bit tough to say.
I mean, he's still under contract. I don't think he has an opt-out after this season. I think it's after next year he could, but I don't think he's leaving LA. I think he's going to stay there for now. I think he likes being in Hollywood. And here's the thing with LeBron James too. this year, it feels like this is the first time he feels like he's accomplished everything he needs, that he feels fulfilled, that he doesn't have to be out there. And he doesn't seem honestly, he doesn't seem that upset that the season ended like this. Anthony Davis has seemed a lot more remorseful and frustrated that the season went the wrong way than LeBron James did. LeBron James has just been sitting all cool with the sunglasses on the sidelines, not playing over the past week. Also, ironically, remember his April Fool's joke that he wasn't going to play for the rest of the season? Turned out to be true because he never appeared in another game, and they said he's going to sit out the last 2 games of the season. So that was 100% factual. But it's just tough. I don't think he's leaving. Of course, we've heard him say that his goal is that the last season of his career, he plays with his son in the NBA. We know his son, no matter how talented he is going to find himself on an NBA roster, at least for 1 year for that to happen, because any franchise that could do that and then attracts LeBron for maybe his farewell tour, that's probably about 2-3 years down the line. For now, though, until that point, I think LeBron is staying in LA, but clearly this roster of bringing in a bunch of 35-year-old guys is not going to work. Honestly, it's frustrating for the Lakers that they had to give up all of that young talent to bring in Anthony Davis, because Brandon Ingram has panned out well, Lonzo Ball as well. I don't like the moves they've made the last 2 years, splitting up the championship roster and then not bringing back Montrezl Harrell, who was a nice piece to the team, not bringing back Schroeder. I know he struggled last year in the playoffs against Phoenix, but he's still a solid player. Kuzma as well. Those were better younger bodies than bringing out Russell Westbrook and Carmelo Anthony, who are both well over the hill. So for the Lakers, I don't really know what to say at this point with LeBron James, but I don't think he's leaving LA.
No, I mean, I can agree in that regards. It just feels like though it's the beginning of the end for the Lakers again, and at least his tenure. It's a little bit tough because I really expected a lot more of the Lakers. I didn't think they were going to win a championship this year, but I definitely expected them to be competitive. When bringing in a guy like Carmelo Anthony, who's still desperate for that ring, and Russell Westbrook, he's proven more and more that he is still a terrible team player on the floor and that he has to be the guy. And it's unfortunate because really the only way I could see him playing for anyone is if it's a rebuilding organization, maybe the Detroit Pistons, that need a player, that can really be the main guy they're shooting. But, again, the Lakers, I mean, we made the joke of, LeBron's probably going to be really like in the play-in tournament where he was against it last year and then for it the season before. It's disappointing, and it's unfortunate that the Lakers can't be consistent. And let's be honest, 2 seasons ago when they won the championship, we thought, hey, there was maybe a little bit more potential after what was many, especially towards the end of Kobe Bryant's career, many tough seasons for the Los Angeles Lakers. And honestly, it starts to feel like this organization really never changed, as nuts as it sounds. And yeah, they won a championship. That's all great and grand, but there's been nothing, and I mean nothing good in LA, even back in LeBron's first season, that says, hey, this team is making right decisions and is making strides, towards being a consistent powerhouse that they once were. So we'll see what happens. But I mean, for LA, it's sad to watch because this is supposed to be the biggest basketball market, and this is supposed to be one of the biggest teams, if not the biggest team in the NBA. And every single game this year for them was terrible. Even games they won did not feel like it was exactly dominant or the best of ways. You never got a positive feeling this season about the Lakers, and I don't really feel any positivity right now for this team going into the offseason. There's going to be a lot they're going to have to change.
So let's shift to the Eastern Conference, which of course is very compelling this year. The West, of course, the Phoenix Suns, the overwhelming favorites. Maybe Memphis can pull something together, maybe the Warriors with their experience, but the East is wide open and nobody really knows who's going to come out of this conference. And I want to talk about the Nets for a second. They had a big win over Cleveland, following up the comeback from 21 down against the Knicks at the Garden. Kyrie Irving's first game at Madison Square Garden in 3 years with the Nets, just with everything that's gone on. Finally got to play at MSG. He and Kevin Durant both showed out in that game. Ben Simmons not going to be available for at least the play-in tournament, probably the rest of the season. Joe Harris, same deal with the ankle surgery. So the Nets do have some, pretty sizable holes, 2 players that would absolutely be in the starting lineup if healthy, that are not out there. But they right now have the 7th seed. Now, this is my ideal path for the Nets. I kind of mapped this out on my radio show at Rutgers the other day. Right now, they're the 7th seed. I hope they hold that. You guaranteed to host the first game. Honestly, if they lose the first game of the playing tournament, I'd be happy, because if they win that game, they're going to be playing the Bucks in a 7-game series. They'd be the 7th seed. Bucks are pretty much set to be the 2 seed. And I don't see the Nets beating the Bucks in a 7-game series. I just don't. They didn't last year. They've struggled against them this season. That will continue. Giannis Antetokounmpo is a better player than Kevin Durant right now. If they lose, though, they're guaranteed a home game for that second play-in spot against the winner of the 9-10 game, which might be the Hornets, who I think the Nets would be able to handle pretty easily. Then they get the 8th seed. They get to play Miami, who I think the Nets have a much better chance of beating. And then I also hope that Boston gets the 3 seed and Philly the 4. I know the Nets beat the Celtics handily in the first round last year, but this Celtics team is really good. Ime Udoka, a former Nets assistant last year, arguably NBA Coach of the Year, right there with Monty Williams, for how he turned around the Celtics from being 12th in the East to contending for the top seed in the conference with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Nets do not match up that well with the Celtics. With the Sixers, though, there's a lot of history there in that series. James Harden does not perform well in the playoffs. Joel Embiid hasn't done great in the postseason either. I think the Nets could possibly handle the Sixers. So my ideal path is this. The Nets lose the first play-in game, win their second, get the 8th seed, play the Heat, who are the top seed, get past them, play the Sixers as the 4 seed, then you go to the conference finals and play either the Bucks or the Celtics. Unlikely, but I think that's the only path the Nets have to the conference finals. I don't see them getting through Milwaukee or Boston. So my question to you, Tim, is this: with everybody there, who is your favorite at this point coming out of the East?
It's honestly unpredictable, because if I'm being honest, even with all the moves that were made this past offseason for Miami, I still cannot circle my head around the fact that they're the 1 seed in the East. To me, again, Brooklyn has a lot of hope still, especially for those betting on the betting odds as being a favorite. And I think that, yeah, their path is going to be difficult, but I also do want to emphasize this. The Brooklyn Nets, at least, over the last few seasons, if you remember, a lot of the Nets' tough losses, especially last season, came against what? Bad basketball teams. They played down to opponents, whereas against good teams, they played good competitive basketball. For the Nets this year, no matter what seed you are, hey, if you play the 7, and you're going to play the Bucks, that's a big series right away. You're playing the defending well, not theoretically the opening playoff series, of course, it'd be after the play-in, but either way, you'd be opening that first series, playing against the defending champions, and you're going to have to prove yourself immediately. And the path the rest of the way through, hey, if you can get through them, is still not going to be easy. It still could align them, of course, to eventually facing Philadelphia or as well as Miami. But when it's all said and done, I mean, I don't know. For the Nets, it's a little bit 50-50. I think that they have just as good of a shot if Kevin Durant is healthy, if Kyrie Irving plays, and really overall, if that team can continue to mesh to play good basketball. And I'm not sure if this is new. I was watching something yesterday. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw a video yesterday. I just don't know if it was yesterday or if it was a past season, so I don't want to spit out a fact that could be incorrect. But I saw a video of Jimmy Butler trying to fight on the sideline.
Yes.
Went too far. So to me, that's also interesting, because we're talking about a team that's a 1 seed, and you have arguably your star player trying to get into a fight with a head coach. And I think it was Udonis Haslem, if I could be wrong. And he was trying.
I am so glad that you brought this up, because the weekend that happened, I wanted to talk about that so bad, but I was doing 5 softball games at Rutgers, so we didn't do a show that weekend. But it was 2 days after that incident. And, I got to just go off on a little tangent here. If the Heat really think they're going to be contenders, if your star player is fighting with not only the longest tenured player in the history of your team, but also your coach, who is a 2-time NBA champion, I mean, that's not a good sign. Jimmy Butler fighting Eric Spoelstra and Udonis Haslem. Jimmy Butler is a great player, but we've seen a history in his career where he wears out his welcome with teams and ends up kind of finding his way out. And Miami loves him for his performance in the bubble 2 years ago, nearly beating the Lakers for an NBA title. But we saw it end badly in Chicago. We saw it end badly in Minnesota. Philly clearly didn't want him after just half a year with him. So he's got a history of kind of wearing out his welcome. But how can you say that a team where you've got your star player trying to fight your head coach and trying to square up with a player who's played for the team for 2 decades, how can you think that that team is the favorites in the Eastern Conference? That's why I don't understand anybody who thinks Miami is going to win. And I'm not even mentioning the fact that you're in a conference with Giannis Antetokounmpo, Jason Tatum, and Joel Embiid and James Harden and Kevin Durant. And all of those star players are better than Jimmy Butler.
Well, and that's a valid point. And again, to your point of the story of, hey, if the Nets lose the first play-in game and they fall to the 8, I mean, hey, a Miami team that's right now not getting along pretty well is, a way that, yeah, I guess you could say it could be an easy series victory for them. But again, it goes to the disappointment, unfortunately, really over the last few years of it feels like there's never really been a dominant one seed, at least over the last 4 years, in the NBA playoffs. It doesn't matter where you're seated, just like March Madness, except there's a series component to it of who's playing the better basketball when it matters will go on. And of course, again, you look at the bubble, Miami, no one expected Miami to be, be in the finals with the Lakers. And in hindsight, looking at the Lakers, I don't think anyone now would have expected the Lakers to be in a championship back in 2020. So it's a little bit of a crapshoot, as they like to say, in regards to, there's not much that you can really anticipate. You could say you have a favorite, but we all know every season there's always going to be a disappointment. And I'm going to say this, and I know it sounds a little bit weird, but every season how we talk about the NBA playoffs of, oh, we feel like this team could sweep and so on. I don't really feel, believe it or not, this season. Maybe we could say it a little bit on the Western Conference, but even then, I don't know. I just don't know if this first series we see any team sweep, if I'm being honest. I think every team's going to give up at least one game to whoever they play.
Yeah, I agree with you on that 100%. I think the only one that could have a chance is Phoenix if they're not against the Clippers. If the Clippers win and they get the 7 seed, I think Phoenix, whoever else they end up facing, whether it be Minnesota or New Orleans, I think those are teams that they could sweep in 4 games. I don't see them sweeping the Clippers. I think that's the only possibility. It's going to be a fun NBA postseason nonetheless. We'll break it all down next week, but let's finish with NASCAR. And the Xfinity Series had an interesting ending last night. 16 cautions in the race, including a massive accident that led to overtime involving Sam Mayer and his teammate Noah Gragson that ended up taking out about 10 cars out of the race. But then at the end, Sam Mayer and Ty Gibbs made contact. Brandon Jones got through to win the race. And let's not forget Ty Gibbs roughed up his own teammate to win at Richmond just a week ago. Now he kind of gets it back, but from a different driver, ends up hitting Sam Mayer under caution. Then we get a really stupid fight where you've got Ty Gibbs punching Sam Mayer while wearing his helmet. And I'm not saying that I'm an expert when it comes to physical hand-to-hand combat. But all of that being said, if you're going to have the audacity to start punching an opponent, you should probably take off your helmet. And that'll make you seem a little less like a coward, because Sam's not able to get any shots in when you're wearing a big piece of plastic on your head. So that always annoys me. If you're going to have a fight in NASCAR, this reminds me of the Suarez McDowell thing a couple years ago. Take off your helmet. When you see hockey, when they fight, they take off the gloves, they take off the helmet, they drop everything and get going. It's just ridiculous. And Ty Gibbs, I think it's funny how at just 19 years old, he's become really public enemy number 1 here in the Xfinity Series in just his first full-time season.
Well, I'll say this. Last week where I was defending him in regards to the fact that, hey, don't get me wrong, obviously, last week, John Hunter did the right thing. He battled him cleanly, got around him cleanly, and, Ty turned around and ran him for a win. But at the same time, in the defense of Ty Gibbs, I feel that it's short track racing. You should expect that, especially a young kid that is going to have to do a lot of learning. Let's be honest, don't get me wrong, talented race car driver, but just for example, Joey Logano, a great comparison. Now I know Logano, and for the record, I don't think Gibbs, when he gets the Cup, is going to struggle as much as Logano had, but Logano had to do a lot of learning his first season, and had a very similar style. I feel that, you're going to see, moves like that happen. And Richmond, it's practically historically, a race that gets spread out and then a good ending with a bump and run and so on. So it's like, I can see that coming. I can defend him in that regard. But yesterday, I mean, what Ty needs to understand first off is the fact of you're racing for $100,000. And I understand he's side by side for that position, but Sam Mayer is doing whatever he can to get himself in that mix. And he felt that was the best opportunity he could to get to AJ Allmendinger. Now, of course, it didn't happen in regards to he couldn't hold it on Allmendinger's outside and, of course, complete the pass coming to the checkered flag. But it was the fact of he was willing to put it all on the line to try to help out his team. And again, I can't emphasize it enough too. $100,000. This doesn't all go to the driver. It goes to the team, and then the driver gets whatever is left over. So it's more of racing for your team as well as individually. And if you want to figure out the points perspective, yeah, Ty Dillon loses a couple points, so be it. But you have to remember, at the end of the day, he wasn't going to win the race. So what does it matter? Only wins and stage wins give you playoff points. Of course, standings helps you a little bit in terms of extra bonus points. But when it's all said and done, it doesn't mean much.
And he's already locked into the playoffs too. He's already won this season.
Exactly. So it's like to me of that, and now going to the point of the good little punches that Ty Gibbs threw. I have no problem with him throwing punches. I'm not the one as well for physical altercations, but come on now. I said the same thing about Kevin Harvick. Be a man. Take off your helmet if you want to face him face to face. And it's the fact of the matter of, again, he's young. He made a mistake. And I agree with Sam Mayer's analysis. I don't know if you saw post-race of, well, one of two things happened. Either he didn't want to, he was worried about something, didn't want to take his helmet off, which I don't think is the case, or he generally just thought about coming straight up, and it was in his mind the whole time that he was going to punch him. And for the record, I think that's what it was, because how did the altercation start? Mayer was, sitting there talking, and Ty Gibbs came up and he pushed him. Sam Mayer didn't start the altercation. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, he moved him out the way, but Gibbs hit him after the caution, after the caution, but on the cool down lap. And then things continued to the pits. And for the record, I'm not against scuffling. Listen, that's what makes NASCAR so great, unfortunately, is the fights that happen a lot post-race. You think about, for example, all the way back to one of the biggest fights between Kyle Busch and Kevin Harvick, back in Darlington. And that was a long time ago. And of course, most recently, Harvick and Chase Elliott, and you think about all those fights, Jeff Gordon, Brad Keselowski, and so on. It sparks fandom in NASCAR. But I mean, Ty Gibbs should be, again, I don't feel like he should be disappointed for bumping and running someone for a win, but he should be disappointed with how he handled himself yesterday. I think that was one of the more embarrassing things we've seen from Ty Gibbs, unfortunately. And that goes up there with ARCA intentionally wrecking drivers and so on, because let's be honest, that to me is frustrating for the sport of ARCA as well. When you have guys that can't pass each other cleanly and it comes down to dumping each other, it just doesn't make things look good. And I hold Ty Gibbs to a high standard. I really think, and I'll say it like this, and I don't say this about many drivers coming through Xfinity, if I'm being honest. I've talked about drivers such as Eric Jones, Christopher Bell, that, in my opinion, have gotten very high praise and haven't exactly lived up to the expectation. I believe that Ty Gibbs is going to be just like Chase Elliott when he comes to the Cup Series. He will be successful. Doesn't mean he'll win in his first season, but I see him being someone that season in, season out is going to be successful and going to be a competitor. And I can't undermine that enough in the fact that he's going to go through some tough stuff. Don't get me wrong, but just the way he handled himself, yesterday, it's a little bit difficult to see, because he has a lot to learn, and he's gonna have to realize that if you give, sometimes you're gonna have to take it, and that's just the way it goes. And he was on the taking end, of receiving yesterday, and maybe next week he'll turn around and he could probably be punting Sam Mayer out the way. I also don't believe this altercation is purely over with, even though they shook hands in a holler after the race.
Yeah, that was probably the most unwilling shaking of hands that has ever occurred at a NASCAR track, with Ty Gibbs and Sam Mayer after the race. But I like how you mentioned Chase Elliott, and this is how I mean, Ty Gibbs instantly in the Xfinity Series competing for wins. Like last year, even on his part-time schedule, race in, race out. I know he's racing for Joe Gibbs Racing, but we've seen people struggle with JGR in those cars before. And I mean, he's been more consistent than Brandon Jones, who's been with the team for 5 years. I mean, he's been so great. I really think he's probably the biggest prospect out of the Xfinity Series when he makes the move to Cup since Chase Elliott. So I think, it's definitely well-deserved praise, but he's also got to mature. He's a young kid, and that was not a good display at all last night. Now the Cup Series goes racing tonight, and we got to finish off with our picks, where somehow I am just rolling and steamrolling Tim. The last 2 weeks have been hilarious. Now let's first look at COTA, where Austin Cindric got into all kinds of trouble, did not have a good race. Kyle Busch is in 6th place. Tim's going to gain a bunch of points on me. Final lap, Kyle Busch spins out. Rex finishes outside the top 20, and I end up gaining a couple points.
Twice.
Yep.
Twice in the final lap.
Then last week, of course, Ross Chastain had finished on the podium 4 straight weeks. He was coming off his first career win. He was going to Richmond, and he ran up front most of the race. And, it seemed like a good pick. I went with Denny Hamlin, who had not finished in the top 10 yet all season. But what happens? Denny Hamlin plays the strategy right, wins the race. Ross Chastain disappears in the 3rd stage because of his strategy, ends up finishing in 20th, and I just expand my lead even more. So, Tim, you're well behind in points. I'll let you get first dibs. Who are you picking tonight for Martinsville?
Chase Elliott. Chase Elliott's going to get his first win of the season. I think the story continues. And listen, I'm going to say this. I was very surprised. And honestly, I know it sounds weird, but this is probably one of my most confident picks, believe it or not, that I've had this season. I feel that in Martinsville, Hendrick is, not just historically done well, but they've shown a lot of speed in practice, and lap averages as well really prove that Hendrick overall as an organization is looking really, really good for this race. I think about as well, obviously, Chase Elliott winning that big Martinsville race 2 years ago. Last year, I know Alex Bowman turned around and won, controversially, towards the end of that race. But when it's all said and done, Hendrick's been consistent. They've shown some speed. And the big thing here in these flat tracks, too, I'll say this, the LA Coliseum, as it sounds, is the closest comparison for a race like this in terms of preparation. And, I felt like Hendrick overall had a lot of speed at the Coliseum. And I'll say this too, not to jump ship. I know you have to make your prediction as well, but yesterday you mentioned 16 cautions. I know it's a 400 lap race, but in these next gen cars, from at least what I've been able to distinguish, and there hasn't been obviously a lot of packing group stuff that a lot of these drivers have had to deal with, but I feel like we're going to see over 16 cautions tonight. I really do believe that. I think that we're going to see a lot of accidents. And towards the end, of course, it's always crapshoot in Martinsville, but I really do think that we're going to see a lot of guys locking it up, stacking up, a lot of chain reaction accidents that come as a factor of this next-gen car. And hopefully a lot of guys don't cut down tires and have problems, as the race goes on and we see guys losing laps. But there is definitely going to be a lot of cautions tonight, and this is a very difficult track that a lot of these guys are going to have to deal with, especially when for really the first time ever it's paperclip. I shouldn't say first time ever, but the first time at least in a while, guys are talking about purely downshifting every lap and trying all these other things just to find extra speed and grip off the ends, off the edge of the corners.
My pick, I'm going to go with the person who competed for Rookie of the Year with Chase Elliott in 2016. That's Ryan Blaney. Now, Penske looked really good at the start of the next-gen era. Joey Logano, by the way, the only short track before Richmond was the LA Coliseum. Logano won that clash. And then, of course, Cindric winning at Daytona. The team was strong at Auto Club. But since then, they've kind of faded over the last 4 to 5 races. But I think that'll change today. Ryan Blaney, has driven very well this season, had a good run at Richmond, didn't really play the strategy right. We've also seen Penske have some issues with fueling so far this season. But I think they're going to get it straightened out at Martinsville. Blaney's been fast there before. I think he's going to get it done. I think it's going to be a good run for Penske, who are kind of starting to slip a little bit. Hendrick, of course, with the wins this season. Chevy as a manufacturer having a great year. And of course, Joe Gibbs Racing getting their first great run of the year, getting 3 cars in the top 7 last week at Richmond. So for that reason, I got Ryan Blaney shifting the tide, getting the win for Penske tonight in the night race at Martinsville. Now, next week, we'll talk. Go ahead.
You got faith in his pit crew, though? Because that's what's really hurt Ryan Blaney this season. It's been
I think they're going to straighten it out. I think tonight's the night they're going to turn it around. I think they're going to be energized, especially with Joe Gibbs Racing now trying the new, format or whatever it's called with their pit stops, where the the crew members run all out from the back of the car. I don't know. I feel like that's prone to have some mistakes, and I don't know. And it didn't really help them speed-wise last week. I think Blaney is going to be able to find his way to the front. I think he's going to make sure he doesn't get pushed around too much. And I think even if he doesn't win, he's going to get a really good run in tonight. So regardless, I am confident that Ryan Blaney is going to continue my streak of getting me more points than you. So we'll see what happens. But next week, we're going to recap Martinsville. Of course, the Bristol Dirt Race coming up on Easter night, next Sunday night. And then, of course, NBA playoffs getting started. We'll talk about all that. And our NFL draft coverage is just 2 weeks away. Stay tuned for that. You can follow along with our NASCAR Pick'em on Twitter at SportsBeak Live. And again, you can find our MLB preseason predictions. Me, Tim, Raheel, and Zoe put our picks for the World Series and all the different awards. So you can check that out on a beautifully made graphic by yours truly on Twitter at SportsBeak Live. But until next time, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Signing off of Sports Speak. We hope you have a great rest of your weekend.